Holistically minded cyberpunks have developed designer foods and vitamins to promote learning, psychic flexibility, and increase the mind's bandwidth. When penetrating a secure system or making a run, a cyberpunk needs to be highly alert. The slightest entry error could mean disaster. These uncontrolled substances descend from the psychotropic experimentation of the 60s. Legal drugs that make one smarter? Can anyone afford to just say no? Is this the face of the future? Will mind machines and vitamins replace heroin and crack?
Drugs are the illicit drugs of the future will probably reflect in some way what the future society is about. So, what if someone came up with a drug that made you a little bit smarter? Didn't do anything, just made you, raised your IQ 50 points. Could you afford not to take it? Having taken it, would you like to go back? It'd be 50 points stupider. I mean, it's something, and that could be maybe, that's a possibility in a way, something that would, speed up the synaptic flow and just make you really, really sharp. It's yeah, that would be an interesting one. It's sort of like, it would be like steroids for stockbrokers.
The cyberpunk movement labors ceaselessly to bring the promise of Gibson's visions to fruition. Almost as soon as they were published, cyberpunks concretized these concepts, rendering them in stark, shuddering hues. Still, there are a few things which technology cannot yet provide for. For instance, Gibson's concept of microsurgical implants, or biosorps. In the novel, some characters had small plugs behind their ears which read a microfiche code and could endow them with skills or abilities they would not otherwise possess.
The thing of Microsoft technology, where a person, say, wants to fix a car, doesn't know anything about a car, but you can have a slot engineered in the side of your neck, and you can take a Biosoft a program, stick it in, plug it in, and you'll know everything about fixing a car. I mean, that sort of thing is amazing. That's got to be great.
Yeah, I'd have the whole set for languages. I'd get all the Berlitz chips.
Almost all of Gibson's major characters are surgically altered. For example, Molly, the more traditionally heroic counterpart to Case, and his romantic interest. She sees the world through permanently bonded mirror shades with integral readouts. Her nervous system has been altered to make her reactions to that world quicker as to how she deals with that world.
She held out her hands, palms up, the white fingers slightly spread, and with a barely audible click, 10 double-edged, 4-centimeter scalpel blades slid from their housing beneath the burgundy nails. She smiled. The nails slowly withdrew.
Gibson's radicals have the most bizarre surgery possible to guarantee their uniqueness.
His face was a simple graft grown on collagen and shark cartilage polysaccharides, smooth and hideous. It was one of the nastiest pieces of elective surgery Case had ever seen. When Angelo smiled, revealing the razor-sharp canines of some large animal, Case was actually relieved. Tooth bud transplants. He'd seen that before.
The only way cyberpunks can satisfy their curiosity about interfacing more totally with the machine, in this case becoming a cyborg, is by following the scientific research conducted to aid the handicapped. Immense interest has grown concerning the latest developments in prosthesis.
We're analyzing the energy now, and it's absolutely marvelous. Physically, she's no longer progressing dangerously. Dosage has been normal.
There's a lot of research being done in the United States to enable very, very handicapped people to interface with computers. And that's another area where that brain plug stuff is eventually going to come from. I talked to a man 2 days ago who's working in eastern Canada on a project that will allow totally blind people whose optic nerves have actually been severely damaged, to watch television. And what they're doing is they're going directly into the sight center of the brain and stimulating it electronically. So a totally blind person can watch television, a totally blind person can then walk around with a mini cam and not be a totally blind person.
Following and expanding upon the work of the semi-mythical Utah group, Dr. Joseph Rosen's work with the disabled at the Palo Alto VA Hospital and his classes at Stanford have made him a cyberpunk hero. He may be the first to actually put chips in people.
Presently, when we reconstruct somebody, we're repairing some injury. In plastic surgery, the surgical field I'm in, we repair some injury. We replace a part that's missing. We take a congenital deformity when a patient's born with a cleft lip and bring that lip and join it. Patients has formed a tumor, we remove that. We essentially repair defects of nature or acquired defects. In cosmetic or aesthetic surgery, a patient often comes in who's normal, and we change the way they look. We change their appearance. In the future, we can imagine a patient coming in who wants to do something he can't do with his limb. His limb is normal, but he can't jump as high as he'd like to jump. We can imagine altering the function. If you look at a kangaroo, they've over the years altered their function in their leg by taking a certain muscle and just forming it into a band, almost like a rubber band. And what they do is they lean down, they stretch out that band, and they use that band as it releases to allow them to jump. You can imagine doing the same thing on a patient, someone who wants to jump higher than the next person, taking a muscle and altering it in the leg, so changing, allowing them to jump more. Or you can imagine not just doing it with your own parts, but adding parts, making a hybrid person where we add in some kind of mechanical part into their arm to allow them to do some function they couldn't do before. A mix between a robotic limb and a real limb. There are certain advantages of a robotic limb over a normal limb. A robotic limb can be designed so that it sensed danger before it reached it. If it was near a fire, for instance, it could sense a fire from several feet away and then move away from it. Whereas in a human hand, you get close enough that you may get burned before you can move it fast enough. Especially true since the industrial age, where devices and machines move faster and faster. So a punch press may come down on a hand before the hand can move out of the way. A robotic hand may be able to sense the punch press moving and move faster than your normal hand would be to protect it. The other advantage of a robotic hand, it's much easier to replace than a damaged human hand would be. If a patient came in and wanted wings built on their back, how would we do it? And although we never see a patient that comes in asking for wings to fly, we're trained in techniques that allow us to build a wing out of parts in the body by shifting muscles from the leg and changing the structure of your chest. You could actually build a patient with wings, although physically he couldn't fly because he doesn't match the rules in terms of the amount of weight compared to the amount of wing surface. Although if you brought in hybrid materials, you could potentially actually build wings that could allow you to glide, maybe like a flying squirrel or that kind of creature that would glide, although you don't have the force to develop to actually take off. Going further in this area, in our lab, we're working on devices to allow us to interface with the peripheral nervous system as a rehabilitation tool, to take a patient who's had a nerve injury and repair that injury, or to take a patient who lost a limb, like an arm. You have a robotic arm that's very advanced, but there's no way to splice or interface that robotic arm to your nervous system. So we're developing some devices like silicon chips that can be implanted in the peripheral nerves and allow us to make a communication channel between your nervous system and such a device like a robotic arm. Although even those devices are 10 or 20 years in the future, and are presently funded by the Veterans Affairs, who gives us money to study these devices because they could help disabled veterans with either loss of limb or even a paralyzed spinal cord by transferring information from the upper extremity that works to the lower extremity that doesn't work.
All of this may make some think of 21st century Frankensteins, yet ethics change as fashions change. And in as little as 20 years, no one may remark on the mechanical and electronic alteration of human beings.
To think about putting devices in man, electronic devices, seems very foreign, but for 20 years we've been putting in pacemakers, which is a very complicated device, placed into the heart, and more recently we've placed in a large number of devices for hearing that are linking up not directly to the nerve, but to the hair cells that are used in hearing in your cochlear. And there is a lot of research being done on devices for vision. So these devices are devices that are either being used clinically now or being actively researched. To go the next step and to implant these devices in normal people so that they can improve their skills is something that I don't think we do right now, but I wouldn't rule something out like that for the future.
It's going to be very commercial. And I think we could wind up with something that felt like having a very, very expensive American television commercial injected directly into your cortex. I mean, I don't find that an appealing idea.
While cyberpunks feverishly plan and build their future, many average people fear a world ruled by machines, controlling our lives, or worst yet, having no use for us at all. This technophobia is widespread, and what is one man's dearest fantasy is another's most horrific nightmare.
I'm always a little amazed when I run into people who feel that technology is something that's outside of the individual, that one can either accept or reject. And that's true in a sense, but at this stage of the game, we are technology. We've become something, I think in some very real sense, part of the world's population is already post-human. And if you consider the health options available to a millionaire in Beverly Hills as opposed to a man starving in the streets in Bangladesh, the man in Beverly Hills can, in effect, buy himself a new set of organs. I mean, when you look at that sort of gap, and the man in Bangladesh is still human. He's a human being from an agricultural planet. The man in Beverly Hills is something else. He may still be human, but he's in some way, I think he's also post-human. I think this is, the future has already happened.
I think there are deeper fears. People are afraid that technology will make them less free, make them less powerful in a personal way. And that's entirely possible. And in fact, there are lots of good examples of how that's happened, the defense industry being a major one. But technology can also empower. I mean, you could take that argument all the way back and say that the first ape-like humanoid who used a tool was the guy who put the nail in our coffin, right? Because our tools, oh my God, you know, it's not my arm, it's a hammer. Does that mean I've lost power to the hammer? Or does that mean I can build a cathedral, you know? Is it half full or is it half empty? The question isn't whether or not the medium is intrinsically evil or scary. The question is whether or not we have a culture and a society and a group of artists who can rise to the occasion of using it in a way that enhances us.
You're doing it. That's what cyberpunk means. Individual power to change your own body, to operate your own brain, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. So certainly in the future, you'll have plastic surgery, you can change the way you look, you can rejuvenating drugs, you can, there will be brain chips undoubtedly. Hey, it is scary, and there's no utopia here. Human nature has its dark sides. There'll always be power-hungry, evil people trying to screw it up. It's going to be more demanding, but we're getting smarter, and we're getting nicer. We're learning how to get along with each other. And yeah, there are always going to be people who go too far. There'll be people that'll be having artificial limbs, winning arm wrestling contests. Human competition will lead to all strange things.